This is the New York Police Department's Bomb Squad. Part human,
we'll find it.
Part dog, part robot, all one team.
Lethal and indiscriminate. To disarm one is to save countless lives.
NYPD Bomb Squad has given the all clear.
One reason the members of the oldest and biggest bomb squad in the United States are unique.
Bomb Squad was able to safely remove a device.
When you don't see them, the NYPD Bomb Squad is always watching for that unsuspecting threat.
NYPD Bomb Squad racing in and hauling away another suspicious package.
Package has been properly identified.
You're listening to Tales from the Boom Room. Profiles of the NYPD's arson, explosion, and bomb squad. All right. Welcome to what is the second installation this week of Tales from the Boom Room. The previous volume was volume 21. Another episode here at the Mike the New Haven podcast. This is episode 172. And I mentioned the previous volume, of course, was Fred Manzanillo from the Arson Explosion Squad, who not only did time in A&E to end his career, but was in missing persons twice, first as a cop and then later on as a sergeant. Worked the Happy Land Fire as a member of missing persons, as a matter of fact. Was out on patrol in Midtown North for many, many years. 6 years, I believe, of his career was spent there before he moved on to the other divisions. So he was great to talk to. I enjoyed him immensely. Now, it is Boom Room week. Like I said earlier, when he was on, you got him on Tuesday. And today, for volume 22, you get my next guest, experienced both the downfall and revival of New York City with a bird's eye view, I might add, as a member of first the New York City Transit Police and then later on the NYPD. He joined the Transit Police originally in 1972 before moving on laterally to the NYPD in 1973 with stops in the Tactical Patrol Force and the Emergency Service Unit. He was tailor-made for his next unit, of course, which was the Bomb Squad. And he just had to flex on everybody. It's not enough to do one stint in the Bomb Squad. He just had to be cooler than everybody and do two. 84 to 93 was his first stint, and then he came back as a sergeant, and he spent 1995 until his retirement in 1999 in the Bomb Squad. And that, for volume 22 of Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's arson, explosion, and bomb squad, is retired NYPD Bomb Squad Sergeant Eddie Hayes. Eddie, welcome. How are you? Good. How are you, Mike? I'm doing well. And to the listeners, I apologize for the background noise. My neighbor's doing yard work. It is that time of year. So if your ears are ringing, don't worry, mine are too. So we'll start with the standard question for all my guests. Your early years, where'd you spend them?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
No problem. Your early years, where did you spend them?
Okay, I came on the job, like you said, I was in New York City Transit Authority, which was separate back then from what New York City is now combined with transit and housing. So I did 9 months with the transit, and then I also was on the list to become a New York City police officer. So in 73, I went to the academy. I had to leave the transit and go back in the academy and do it all over again, and graduated. And my first command was the 107 precinct in Queens. And I stayed there, and I was kind of like realizing that that's not a place to go when you first start your career. It's more of like a B house or a C house. And I know that at that time there was a career path, and they went ahead and they were going to probably transfer me anyway to an A house. So in the interim, I had volunteered, and I went over and I filled out an application for TPF. And just about the time that I probably would have got transferred to an A house, I got into TPF, which is considered an A house assignment, because we worked in all the high crime locations on foot. And I was there until the layoffs in 73, 75. So I'm 75 because you had to have at least 5 years on the job in order to be saved. So I stayed 2 years outside of the police department, and then I came back. And then I went ahead and came back, and I was assigned to the 7th precinct. And I was down in the 7th precinct, and Chief McDermott, who had been my boss when I was in there before the layoffs, came back just about the same day I got my shield back, which was August 16th, 1977. And I called him to congratulate him. And he said to me, "Where are you, Ed?" I said, "Well, right now, I believe I'm going to the 7th precinct." He said to me, "Okay, do you want to come back to TPF?" I said, "Sure." So he said to me, "No problem." Within 3 weeks, I was transferred again from the 7th precinct back to TPF, and I stayed there until I left emergency service. Now, emergency service. Go ahead.
Oh, my apologies. I was just going to say Ed Hayes is our guest tonight on the Mike New podcast. I will say, if you have a question for Ed, please fire it away in the chat. Just to go back a second, because a lot of people, the Tactical Patrol Force is defunct now, but it kind of lives on with the Strategic Response Group as well as the Critical Response Command. For those that may not be familiar with the history of the NYPD, what exactly was the Tactical Patrol Force?
Okay, if you had a riot or a disorderly conduct type of situation, we were mobilized to go to that. If we didn't have any of that going on, we were sent to a high crime precinct to lower the crime if we could by stopping vehicles and taking guns and everything else off the streets. And that would lower the crime in that particular precinct. But if there was any kind of disorder or a riot situation, we would be mobilized to go to that. And we were assigned and trained to deal with that situation.
So you covered the start of your career quite excellently. It's an interesting timeline, and I'm glad that you took us through that. So, I guess Tactical Patrol Force, given it was a part of SOD at the time, it's not now because it's not around anymore, but given where it was within the NYPD separate divisions, it made, I imagine, the transition into emergency service a relatively easy one, I imagine.
Well, it wasn't really that. What happened was, ironically, they were looking for volunteers to take the EMT course, which was 3 weeks of days. And I volunteered from TPF to go to it. And while I was in there, I happened to get friendly with one of the instructors who lived out in Long Island. And he said to me, "Why don't you think about coming to emergency service?" And I said, "I would love to come to emergency service." He said, "Let me give you an application," and I did. And he gave me the application. I filled it out, and I had done some iron work when I was laid off with my father. My father was a steel iron worker, and that really was sort of a big thing. Where I knew how to walk on iron, I knew how to do knots and all that stuff. And I got the interview, and then within probably that was in 1979, right after the Pope's visit. I got transferred into emergency service because of all the expertise that I had in ironworking as well as what I did in TPF.
Once again, ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the background noise there. The yard work's going on. I might have to fist fight a few people as soon as this podcast is over for the lovely intrusion as my ears bleed. So if you could hear that, once again, my apologies. But I will say you had multiple stops within emergency service. You didn't spend your time in one truck. You were in 9 truck originally, then you went down to Harlem in 2 truck, and then you spent time in the Hollywood truck. But a lot of before we get into the ins and outs of ESU, of which you spent from 1980 to 1984 a lot of what ESU deals with, partially at least, is building collapse. Do you feel that your experience in working in the iron industry helped you when it came to those kind of emergencies?
Well, ironically, as you would say, in Delancey Street, while we were in truck 1, there was a building collapse. And my partner at that time was Charlie Epps, who also was in emergency service and left and came into the bomb squad later on with me. We had to go in to see if there were people. There was a couple of people who were trapped in this building. We had to climb in and crawl into this space to get the people out. And when we get the people out, then we were told to hold back, and they were going to shore up the building. But, there's a lot of things that we had done in emergency. But I think that, we were all trained to do what we had to do. And I think everybody in emergency was a remarkable bunch of people that could do what we had to do back then.
So, like I said, you started out in 9 truck, which is out in Queens. Each borough is different in the emergencies that it presents. Each neighborhood is different because, for context, there's 2 trucks mostly for each borough. Brooklyn does have 3. Staten Island only has 1. But in Queens, you got 10 truck out there, and you also have, like I said, 9 where you started. For Queens at that time, what were the most common emergencies to go on in ESU?
Well, in the summer months, we were responsible for the Rockaways. So we would have to respond down there. A lot of times the ambulances from the hospitals weren't available, and we would have to do some kind of emergency medical technician work to get somebody, either they stop breathing or whatever. But it was a long trip because coming from Queens to Rockaway is not around the corner. And
Right.
we were covering all the way on the south shore of Queens. And Truck 9, of course, does the North Shore. And we had some great territory to cover. But a lot of times a lot of it was emergency medical technician stuff that we got to do before the ambulance would arrive. Not too much other than maybe accidents and stuff like that. The reason why I decided to go from 9 to 2 was there was an opening, of course, and my partner and I, Freddie Joe Lorenz, we decided to go to 2 because there was a lot of other things in Manhattan that were going on that we couldn't get involved in, such as climbing bridges and getting people down if they were trying to jump from the bridges and stuff. So we decided to open up our horizon and do more than we could do. So we decided to transfer to what was opening in 2 truck.
So that said, I mean, you mentioned, of course, going up to the bridges and bringing down people who are suicidal. It's a big part of what the emergency service unit does. I believe 5 Truck the other day had a rescue on the Verrazano, if I recall correctly, where they talked somebody down. But all the guys in ESU and gals as well are trained as what's called emergency psychological technicians. Now, I find that interesting because I've heard a few of them when I've interviewed them allude to that. Now, for the listeners that may not understand, I mean, we've heard of emergency medical technician, of course, but emergency psychological technician, what exactly does that entail?
Well, if you have a person that is a little bit on they're either depressed or they're psychologically off balance, we would try to talk them into coming in with us. If not, we had all kinds of non-lethal ways to get them to come in. And then, of course, we had nets, we had all kinds of stuff that we could use. And at that time, we started to use the airbag and stuff like that, if they were talking about jumping from the whatever building they were in. But most of the time, it was you talked them out of what they wanted to try to do. And I think that was such an important thing, that if you didn't jump to conclusions, that you could talk to these people and understand that they have a problem, they're asking for help. And of course, if we could help them, they would probably say, okay, as long as somebody's going to help me, I'm more than happy to come in. And that's basically what we did, whether it was on a bridge or in a building or whatever. But it usually was because somebody wasn't listening, or they just ran out of people that was willing to listen to them. And we came and we tried to help them as much as we could.
So, that goes from 2 truck down into 1 truck. And this is an interesting time to be in ESU because, as I covered before with my FDNY friends and NYPD friends, there's territory for both. And it's not like this now, thankfully. But back then, Rescue 1 and Truck 1 did not really get along all that much. And you guys were racing each other's into jobs. Tell me about your dealings with Rescue 1 back then. Was it that contentious?
Leaving 2 truck and going to 1 truck, as you would call it, the Hollywood truck,
Right.
requires, because most of the press people never traveled as far up north of 59th Street. So anything that was south of 59th Street to Battery Park, you would get coverage. And that doesn't mean I was looking for coverage when I decided to transfer. There was an opening in 1 truck, and the traveling was less for me to get to 1 truck than it was to 2 truck from where I live. So we went to 1 truck, and of course, you have more bridges. You have the Brooklyn Bridge, which is probably one of the biggest bridges that most people, for some reason, decide that they're going to try to jump from or try to get help from. There was once that up in 2 truck, unfortunately, doing a late tour, we got a call from the dispatcher that there was a person climbing the George Washington Bridge. And I told the dispatcher, I said, that's not our jurisdiction. And she says, I know. But she says, nobody in Port Authority climbs bridges. You have to go up. So we went up, and this gentleman was very despondent because he had been an alcohol problem, and his father wouldn't allow him to come to his mother's wake and funeral. So he was going to kill himself after he had dinner with his friend, and his friend called the police. And I went up there and we discussed it. And I said to him, if I can get you into the Bellevue psychiatric care, not the alcoholic location. Would you rather go to the alcoholic? And he says, well, yeah. He says, I said, I can get you into that. So I did. I said, if you're willing to come down with me, I'll get you into that. And I did. I got him in. I told the ambulance attendant, I said, this man is not going to the psychological location like normally. He's got to go to the alcoholic detox center. So they took him there, and hopefully that everything worked out for him. But it was good to have him, that he was willing to listen to me and listen to what I had to offer. And I brought him down. But that was an unusual situation, the George Washington Bridge.
No, of course. And it's always dangerous, both to the rescuer, even though you guys are heavily strapped in, you guys always have ropes at your disposal, of course, and other equipment that keeps you guys safe. But it's especially dangerous to this person, because it's not just the position they're in physically, being this high up with no protective gear, looking down, contemplating this decision to jump. It's where they are mentally. If you say the wrong thing, and it's not that you're trying to say the wrong thing in those situations, that could be the thing that quite literally pushes them over the edge. So it's a very tight rope to walk, literally and figuratively, wouldn't you say?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So that brings us to 1984. I mean, you had four, obviously, as you were describing, very eventful years in ESU. And this is around the time, I feel, maybe it's been going on longer, but I remember talking to our friend Kevin Berry. You know, I asked him point blank, I'm like, why do so many E-cops decide to go into the bomb squad? And he explained why. He did a good job of explaining it. And here you are. You have about 12 years on the job in total. You'd worked for the Transit Authority in between, of course, when the layoffs had occurred. You'd been in tactical patrol force. And like I just said, you came off a great, solid 4-year stint of heavy work in ESU. What was it about the bomb squad that attracted you?
Well, it was a case of most of us back then, whether it was in, we decided that we could get a detective shield and, of course, more money. So the emergency service back then did not offer a detective shield to the officers. So that we had to think about, do we want to stay or do we want to go to get a detective shield and, of course, a little bit more money. So a lot of us left emergency, either went to the bomb squad or they went to crime scene, because both of them would offer the detective shield. So a lot of us volunteered and we went to the bomb squad, or like I said, it became like there was 10 trucks in emergency, as you know. And I think that with all the people that came in around the time I was there, we used to call ourselves Truck 11.
Yeah.
There were so many guys in emergency that came into the bomb squad that it was like another truck, because everybody knew each other. So it was a nice time to come into the bomb squad.
Yeah, and that's a tradition that still continues to today. I mean, you saw guys come in during your time that had the ESU background. That's still going on, you know, guys. It's a stepping stone, and there's nothing wrong with it. And I think it's cool to say that you've been in both. Like, you know, these are, when people think of the NYPD, they definitely think of ESU first and foremost, because it's what they've seen on television, both in shows like Law and Order and the news stories. And they think of the bomb squad. And I do want to say, before we continue, just a shout out to our friends in the live chat, Alicia B, John Latanzio. He's a retired E-man. He worked at Truck 5 first, and then later on Truck 3 in the Bronx. He was just on this show. And Ruth Ann Griffin. Like I said, if you guys have any questions for Sergeant Hayes, put it in the chat, and I'll make sure that I get to it at the proper time. So, you know, anybody that was in the bomb squad in the 80s and the 90s was really in the eye of the storm, because when you're coming in 84, I mean, yeah, you got to go through the probationary period, which you did. Then you went out to Huntsville and you got the training and you got the certification as a bomb technician. But think about it. The FALN still running around. This is not too far after their bombing at One Police Plaza on New Year's Eve of 82. You still got other groups that are active. You got the drug wars going on. And to send a message, you got some of these drug dealers putting car bombs under their rivals' vehicles and blowing them up. Illegal fireworks, you name it, it's there. So for you, you know, just staying abreast of everything as a cop and monitoring not just the terrorism aspect, but like I said, the narco wars too. How eventful was a given day in the bomb squad in, let's say, the mid-1980s?
Well, you know, everybody used to wonder how many devices did we respond to. And of course, over a course of a year, based on the logbook, we would show them that it was about 100. Or maybe a little bit more, that we responded to. And some of them were live, some of them were inert. But the fact was, we had to respond and check them out. But the fact was, people would never realize that there was that many devices going on in the city around them during the course of their time. And of course, there was some, like you said, there was some really dangerous ones, and other ones that we realized that later on. Perfect example was Kevin Barry, which you know, and I, and we got a call to go to the 108 precinct. A woman had a factory, some kind of jewelry factory, and she decided to, she wasn't going to press into these people who wanted to get into the business. And on a Friday afternoon, somebody delivered a pizza box. And she didn't order pizza, nor did anybody else, but she didn't know what to do with it. So she left it out into the parking lot. And in the 107, 108 Long Island City on a Saturday, it's pretty deserted. So she called the Midtown North Precinct on Saturday morning to explain that somebody is trying to muscle in on her business. And she told them about the box and everything. And the detective took all the information, and he called the 108, and the sergeant and showed up, and sure enough, there was a pizza box there. So they didn't do anything. They decided to call the bomb squad. So Kevin and I show up, and the sergeant, at that time was Sergeant Guy Renzi, and we didn't see anybody, and it was an open field, and Guy Renzi wanted to know, how do we want to deal with this? And I said, you know what? I said, why don't we use the robot? I said, Kevin is very good in taking the robot and opening things. So I said, let's use the robot instead of me going down there and checking it out. And sure enough, he puts the robot down there, and he actually got the box, which the way a pizza box is supposed to open. And when it did, there was an explosion and a big fire, and the whole arm of the robot was engulfed in flames. Somebody had put a whole device inside that pizza box that it was set to go off when you opened the box. So those are the type of things what you never expected to happen, because there was no phone calls, there was no suspicious people around the area. You didn't realize that this could be something as dangerous as it was. And it turned out to be, if I had opened it, my hands would have been engulfed in flames. Even with the bomb suit on, my hands never would have been right again. All my fingers would have been probably destroyed, because you don't wear any gloves or anything when you're down there. So those are the type of jobs that we ran into that wasn't the actual course of what you do it suspicious-wise, because if you had a phone call that somebody had left a package, you would know that maybe it is the FLAN or something like that. But this was something out of the ordinary.
I will say, when it comes to devices that are in a confined space, like often when I talk with emergency service guys and FDNY guys, we talk a lot about confined space rescue. And now this is a confined space render safe operation I'll ask you about. With a car bomb where it's underneath the car and you're having a hard time trying to see where exactly it is and mustering up the proper angle. Or if it's a pipe bomb in an enclosed space where, you know, the slightest movements can set it off. How difficult is it to operate in a small region to render safe a device that, like you said, can go off at any time, and the danger is at times, like as in the case of the pizza box, unexpected to an extent?
You have procedures, and we used to follow the protocol. Obviously, we wanted to make sure the public wasn't in danger, so we would try to keep everybody back, and we would close off the street and whatever. And then if we could, we would send down the robot to either open the door or open the package or whatever. And if necessary, we would have one of the bomb techs suit up in the bomb suit, and he would go down and take an x-ray of it. And we could take an x-ray, and then we would be able to look inside of whatever that bag or the package or whatever it was. And we could decide whether or not it was too dangerous to try to diffuse it right there, or was it something that we could open up and take care of? So it was a protocol that, and that all took place after 1983. We had two officers in the bomb squad on New Year's Eve that got hurt, Pastorino and Tony Sempt. Maybe you were aware of that.
82, yeah, Pastorella and Sempt at
that
one
was the
police plaza.
FLAN. And right after that, all the protocol was changed. And then if we could, we would send down the robot to either open the door or open the package or whatever it was. And we could decide whether or not it was too dangerous to try to diffuse it right there, or was it something that we could open up and take care of? So it was a protocol that, and that all took place after 1983. We had two officers in the bomb squad on New Year's Eve that got hurt, Pastorino and Tony Sempt. Maybe you were aware of that.
Yeah.
We got equipment. We got the robots and stuff like that. So when I came in '84, a lot of this stuff was all set in motion that we had to follow. There was no such thing as just taking a chance on your own. You had to follow protocol, and if necessary, you would try to keep everything within the guidelines of whatever you could do.
There was a series of jobs that you described to me off the air, and some that our mutual friends described to me on the air that I want to ask you about because you had a part in them. And that is, the first one, we had a bomber in the subway, an attempted bomber in the subway, in which he had, I believe you told me, and we'll dive into it right now, 2 bombs on him. One went off, and I think that one killed him, but one was still alive, and here he is, a corpse with the live bomb on it. Tell us about that one.
Yeah, 1988, we got a call to go up to 125th Street and 3rd Avenue, which was the subway system. Apparently, prior to our arrival, there was an explosion, and when they went over to where it was, there was a man down, and he was on fire, and his chest had exploded on one side. But he had another device on his other side. He had the stereo wires and everything else. So when we got there, Phil Brown was the other bomb tech that I was working with that day. We couldn't use the robot. We couldn't get the robot into the situation. So we had to do what it's called a hand entry. So we had to go in there, even though one side of him had been blown away and he was dead, there was still another pipe bomb on the other side that had to be diffused because it didn't go off when the other one went off. So you have a hang fire and you don't know why it caused that. So we had to go in and we had to trace the wires according to where it was and had to figure out where it was the center of the battery operated situation. And then we had to diffuse it based on that. And that's how we were able to diffuse it. That man was never identified. Interpol and everybody else had no recollection of who he was. He was a young man, approximately 35 years old. Must have caused the explosion because he had the device on him and he had the speaker wires on his wrist. And I think the way it was supposed to go was he was supposed to hug somebody and cause the wires to complete the circuit and kill him and the person that he was hugging. And he must have came down the subway platform and he hit the stairs and he must have, one of the wires must have hit the metal on the stairwell and that caused it to explode. And that's what caused him to die right then and there. But one of them went off and one of them didn't. So we had to diffuse that one.
New York City at this stage obviously is before 9/11, but even then, given what had happened in recent memory, you guys weren't foreign to terrorism, the threat that it posed in that moment spoke to the vulnerability of New York City to terrorism, particularly the subway system. We unfortunately just saw that with the incident in Brooklyn that thankfully wasn't a lot worse. There could have been fatalities. There weren't, thank goodness. But with that, without giving any trade secrets away, I don't want you to do that. Sometimes in order to stop a bad guy, as I've covered before, you've got to kind of think like a bad guy. So would you find, again, without going into specifics, would you find yourself, along with the other guys in the office, in order to better understand these devices, thinking like the people who would make them?
Well, in the training that we all had taken down in Huntsville, Alabama, the primary reason to take the training was to think like the bomber. So when you had a device, you put yourself in the position of who put this device together, how was it put together, and you were trying to figure out how to diffuse it. But you had to put your mind in the position of the terrorist at the time and place, because obviously if that person put a device together, the only way that a person can diffuse it is to go back to all the steps that he did to put it together and see how he put it together so you could diffuse it.
Right. I want to backtrack for a second, I should say, to 1986. Dennis Mulvaney was going around, and I remember talking about this with our friend Don Sadawi and John Miller, because that was one of John's first big stories when he was still a reporter at NBC. He was going around bombing certain clinics. We're not going to get into what exactly he was doing. It's a whole political to-do, but he had a purpose, and that purpose was planting bombs. He didn't kill anybody, thankfully, but he caused a lot of panic, and it took a while to get him. Ultimately, he did turn himself in after watching a report that John Miller did on NBC, and I think it was the ATF and the bomb squad that apprehended him jointly. But him, looking for him during 1986, tell me about that.
Well, he had a background from the military that he was able to put devices together. And of course, like you said, he was going around putting these devices at the abortion clinics. And some of them was, he could have caused a lot of havoc in the city. And one of them didn't go off. And of course, right before, I think it was Christmas, there was a lot of personnel between police and fire that was down there. And it wasn't until after they saw the device that they realized that if this had gone off, it would have probably killed a lot of firemen and a lot of cops. It didn't. And ironically, a lot of times he would put a device together and then it wouldn't go off as supposedly it was supposed to. And he would call the bomb squad, and he spoke to Detective Dennis Mulcahy the first time he called, and he wanted to know if Dennis could tell him in steps why the device didn't go off, so that the next time he could put a device together, he would have it to go off. So of course Dennis would not do that. I mean, there was no reason for him to tell him how to put a device together so it would work. But fortunately, between like you said, John Miller and of course the Cardinal O'Connor at the time talked him, because he was supposedly a Catholic, and they talked him into trying to give up this cause of trying to bomb abortion clinics and give himself up. And with all that, he finally did give himself up. But yeah, it was a terrible time, and it was a very dangerous time that if those devices had gone off at the abortion clinics, it would have killed a lot of people.
There are a couple of funny jobs that you, Epps, and Barry worked, and the first, I'll get to the second one because that's the better one of the two, because it's crazy as it is funny. But this first one is legitimately funny. Supermarket, suspicious package in the freezer section. You know the job I'm talking about. Tell me about that one.
Well, we get to the supermarket, and everybody's been told to leave and everything else, and we get in to the area, and there's something there, and it has a note attached to it. And naturally, we first take the robot and we put it into the aisle, and we thinking about, well, it's not going to go off. The robot seemed to kind of disarmed it. We get down there, and there was a note, and it said, "This is an armed robbery." It was a skeleton of an arm, and this man had put this all together as a humorous joke. So it was funny, yes.
And the second one, I have on tap the video here, and I'm going to try and show it in short order. And that is, it's October of 1990, and you guys are in the office. It's a late night when you get a call from frantic emergency service and street crime cops, I think auto crime cops, that have this guy pinned down in the middle of the street. And he has a bomb strapped to his chest. Now, before you dive into it, I'm going to play the video here. It's a report from John Miller from 1990. Here's the clip. I got it originally from my interview with Kevin Barry.
Okay.
But sometimes, even now, there is no way for a robot to do the job and no time to put on a bomb suit. A few weeks ago, an alleged kidnapper with a pipe bomb and 2 grenades strapped to him was captured on a Queen street. Emergency service cops and auto crime officers held his arms apart. If the wires he held in each hand touched, the bombs would detonate. Bomb Squad Detective Kevin Barry and Sergeant Joe Ahern went to work to defuse the bombs on the struggling man. Inches from death, with no more protection than a raincoat, they worked in the middle of the street. But when you talk to Kevin Barry or Joe Ahern, they give you that matter-of-fact, all-in-a-day's work patter that seems to come naturally to Bomb Squad members who talk of heroics.
It's more dangerous to be on the outside looking at the bomb business than to be inside and to be knowledgeable about what's going on and have the training and the equipment that builds the confidence to respond to the job. It's a completely different outlook.
But Richard Pastorella knows better. He knows what really goes through their minds, and he's not shy about describing it.
What goes through your mind? Simple. Please, God, let me make the right choice. Let me cut the right wire. Please, let there be enough time. That's what goes through your mind. Are you nervous and scared? more than you could ever imagine. You sweat, your knees literally shake, your hands tremble, especially when you know that the bombs that you're working on work. I'm living proof of that.
So, you get down there and you see this man struggling, as John Miller noted, and you see a situation that is kind of akin to something that happened in 1986 where 2 bomb technicians in LA were killed. Not because a bomb was strapped to a man's chest, but because the wires are there, they're tricky to navigate through, and unfortunately for them, the wrong wire was cut and it resulted in their deaths. So with that in the back of your mind, and the fact that we don't have bomb squad gear on, which makes the operation even more dangerous, take me through that job from your perspective. Can't quite hear you there. Having problems hearing you. Let's see here. Still can't hear you. We're gonna try to fix that problem. Try exiting the stream and then coming back in. Sorry about that. Just click that same link I texted you. So we'll wait for Sergeant Hayes to come back, and then he'll tell that story of that job. It was a job, like I said, in 1990, where, as you saw, there was a bomb strapped to a man's chest. Then shout out to some friends here again in the chat. I see Billy Ryan. Hey, Bill, thanks for showing up. Appreciate you being here. I know you worked with Eddie during his second stint. Well, his first stint too, bomb squad, and his second stint when he was a sergeant. You guys crossed paths, I'm sure. And that first job was funny. I mean, this is an armed robbery. Give us the money. I mean, hey, listen, I wouldn't. That's not my idea of humor, but I can see the humor in it. And like I said, don't be afraid to shoot a question to the sergeant. He's back now, waiting for him to come back in. All right, sorry about that.
Okay,
You're back
am I
now.
back?
Yes,
Okay.
there you go.
All right, so that particular night, Joe Ahern and Kevin responded, and Charlie Epps and I responded. And of course, when we get there, it's an unusual situation. Emergency had arrived before we did, after they got the call from the auto crime sergeant and his driver who stopped these 2 individuals. And this man had a harness on him with devices again, and they took a hand grenade away from him who was sitting in the car. And now he's there, and they don't want him to touch each other, and they don't want him to touch his own hands because he could cause it to go off. And of course, with the emergency service, it's a very difficult situation. They're holding him down, they're keeping him in place. And of course, when we arrive on the scene, it's kind of awkward to put the bomb suit on, because the bomb suit would be nice for us, but what about the emergency service cops? So of course, that's the only time that we had to break protocol and not put the bomb suits on, and go over to the man and defuse it as just like the emergency service was holding him down. And of course, the funny part of it was he asked me, he said to me, "Are you trained in doing this?" And I gave him a very sarcastic remark. I said, "I took one of those home study courses." So I said, "I think I know what I'm doing." And of course, then he got worried. Then he started to say, "Are you sure you really?" Because he was afraid that he was going to die then too. But Joe and Kevin, they got the device and they rendered it safe. So that was good. So there was no problem. But yeah, it was an unusual situation, because if it wasn't for auto crime stopping this car, and of course, unbeknown to them when they first stopped it, there was a woman in the trunk, because they had kidnapped her at the auto teller place, or the ATM machine. And they were driving around with her in the car. And of course, they had this device on them, and they had the hand grenades. So it was an unusual situation. The next day, when they went to the house, they found more devices that were all ready to go if they needed to be. So fortunately, it all was able to be rendered safe.
There's a couple of stories within that job that Kevin had pulled up, and the guy shouted, to your point, he was like, "Don't touch me, wait for the bomb squad." And Kevin was like, "We are the bomb squad." So they started working on him, and after it was done, Kevin asked him, he's like, "So where are you from?" He's like, "Croatia." He's like, "Okay." Now, the reason that he had such a nonchalant response to it is because in the 1970s, one of the many radical groups that terrorized New York was fighters for a free Croatia. And unfortunately, if you go to the Bomb Squad's memorial wall, one of the guys that's on that wall is there as a result of them, and that's Brian Murray, who was killed on
Right.
September 11th, 1976.
The pressure cooking switches, yeah.
Yeah, at the Grand Central Terminal that they removed, took back to the range, and it went off at the range, and he died sadly. So, around this time, 90, you had the murder of Meyer Kahane. You fast forward a little bit towards the end of your first stint in the bomb squad, and you had the Trade Center bombing. Things were changing around this time. Did you sense it personally after Kahane got shot?
No matter what happens, either you have a reaction in New York or California, and it's vice versa. If it's something that takes place in California or in any place in the world, you have to expect that there might be a backlash in New York. And there were times when we had to think about that because of the situation with all the UN missions and embassies. And of course, it just was one of those type of situations. You never know what to expect based on the news, but you had to realize that this was all going to happen around you.
Yeah. So you left in 1993, and you spent some time in the 13th and 17th precincts after you had gotten promoted to sergeant, of course. You spent some time in the academy as well. Before I get back to your years in the bomb squad with the second stint from 95 to 99, it had been a lot of energetic, frenetic work between TPF, ESU, and the bomb squad. Even though I'm sure you missed it a little bit, that time from 93 to 95, doing other things outside of SOD, was it a refreshing change of pace for you?
It was. I hadn't been on the street in quite a while, so getting a driver to drive me in the precincts, because as a patrol supervisor, you had a driver. There were things I was not aware of was going on. A perfect example was there was somebody who had a disabled auto, and I was under the impression, and I used to remember doing that myself, was we would push the person to the curb or push the person off the highway. And my driver said to me, boss, we can't push him. I said, why not? He said, because we don't have the special bumpers. Only highway unit has them. I said, what do you mean by special bumpers? He said, without that bumper, we would set off our airbags if we tried to push him, because as soon as we hit his car, the airbags would go off. So things like that. And the radios in the car no longer were the radio like you would normally pick up a phone and talk to somebody. Everybody carried their own portable radios. So I think in the sense that making sergeant and leaving what I was doing for so many years, it was important. It was an education, but it also was something that as a supervisor, I think everybody should go through, because I think that that's the reason why they have you out there as a supervisor, trying to do what you're supposed to do, supervise men and women. So to me, going to the 13th and then 6 months later to the 17th, because Commissioner Kelly wouldn't allow anybody who just got made sergeant stay more than 6 months in any first command. Was because it gave me a background that when I finally did get back into the bomb in 95, I was better off because of that, because I knew how to be a supervisor now.
So you get there again in 95, and the bomb squad's relatively the same. Okay, we lost Eddie for a second. He'll come back. He'll come back in a second. You got to love technology. Although, he's using a phone, but it's worked well for the most part. We haven't had too many problems. So we're going to have Eddie come back in momentarily. He'll click the same link and he'll log back in. Hey, Stu. I see Stuart Kelsall in the chat. Good to see you, my friend. But when Eddie comes back, we'll get him to talk about his second stint in the bomb squad. So we'll see him in short order. We'll just wait for him to come back. And that said, it's not, here he is again. All right, hold the thought, hold the presses. Let me just display him once again. We'll wait for him to sign back on.
Are you back?
Yeah,
Mike?
Yep, you're back. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. But
I don't know.
I
My phone just went dead on me. Okay.
You got it charged up now?
Yeah, it's all charged.
All right, there you go. So that said, getting back into the bomb squad 95, it's relatively the same roster. Not much has changed in those last couple of years. A couple of new faces, yeah, but they were from ESU, so you probably knew them. And that said, when you did come back, before we get into the other jobs that you were there for, did that make it an easier transition back? The fact that it hadn't been that long, that it was relatively the same people still working there?
No, it wasn't. And I have to say that honestly. I think coming back not as a detective working side by side with all the other detectives, but coming back as a supervisor to supervise them was probably the hardest thing to do.
Mm.
And I think that coming back was not easy for me because everybody would just say, "Oh, come on," they thought I was going to be easy and let them do what they wanted to do, and of course I couldn't because I'm really responsible for their life. And sending down a bomb tech in a bomb suit, it was important for me to realize that hopefully he'll come back in the bomb suit and be able to live another day. But I think that coming back to a unit that after you know everybody is not easy.
No, I imagine. 1996. There's an interesting job that gets overshadowed because something else happened that summer of '96 that took more of the headlines. But New York, people forget, had its own Zodiac killer for a while that was running around causing havoc, and it all ended in Queens. But the problem was when they apprehended him, he said, "I have pipe bombs in the apartment," and that was I'm going to have Brian Hearn on the show soon to discuss that because that was his first bomb job. He had just come back from Huntsville. Were you there for that?
No, I wasn't. I didn't.
Okay.
I didn't get on that job.
Okay, so then Brian will discuss it when he's on. But you were a part of the team within the bomb squad, and this really encompassed the entire unit. And I've covered it numerous times, but each perspective is different. TWA, Flight 800. Some guys in the unit had a background in airline information. Kevin, I think, moonlighted for the airlines. Richie Teamsma worked for the airlines before he came on the job. Danny McNally was in the Air Force. So was Jimmy Carano and Jeff Oberdier. So everybody's in on this, and it's creating a lot of different thoughts on this. Not conflict, but different thoughts because, there's two camps and there's evidence to support either side. For you, looking at that plane in the aftermath of it and trying to literally piece together one of the worst air disasters, forget New York, that the country has ever seen. What was that like for you as a sergeant?
We were out there with all the other people from Suffolk Bomb Squad, Nassau Bomb Squad. Jimmy Kallstrom from the FBI was gracious enough to allow all of us to come and work with him. And we tried to give him the best we could as far as what we picked up or maybe recovered or what we thought might have happened. And I think that under the circumstances, I think we all felt that we did as best we could on that job because, it was a big job. And of course, unfortunately, so many people had lost their lives. But there's so many theories, as you know, that probably was given to you about what happened. And of course, nobody will ever say what was the real theory or what was the real story because nobody really has that story. But going out there, it was an interesting time. And we were out there for almost 6 months, I guess, on and off, doing what we could. And I think that we all tried to contribute to what we could do with that device. And we learned a lot. And of course, the FBI, after we put the plane back together with them, brought that plane down to Quantico to teach all future FBI agents about post-blasts and stuff like that with a bomb. And I think that was just recently that they had 20 years later, 25 years later, they went ahead and they disassembled that thing and they get rid of it. But during the time, I think it really served as a very good training exercise about what to look for and how it could have affect everything.
So fast forwarding ahead to 1997, and as I've covered before on the show, and I'll cover again in depth soon, later in the summer, there was the UN job in 97. That's been covered before extensively with the letter bombs. That was handled. I think Jerry Hogue was a sergeant on that one. Hopefully I can get him on the show soon. And then you fast forward to the summer. And at these jobs, the major jobs that happen when the lieutenant has already left for the day, the lieutenant at the time in charge of the unit was Mike White. You at least need a sergeant there. And so, when Paul and Rich had the job in Brooklyn with the guys from Hamas, I believe you were the sergeant there before everybody else got there and handled the scene. So just get into a scene like that where there's so much going on. ESU is there, EMS is there because these guys got shot by ESU. You got obviously your guys there. In an environment that is anything but tranquil and civil, what helped you personally calm down? Well, not calm down, but focus in, I should say, on the task at hand, get the information you needed, and ensure that the operation flowed as smoothly as possible?
Well, initially at that job, back then we didn't have cell phones, and nobody could communicate with me. And I was at home, and I was ready to come in for a day tour. But because the way the Detective Bureau works is whoever is covering the day tour also is responsible if anything happens on the late tour. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, I believe I got a call from Rich Teamsma or Paul Yurko telling me that they were going to this job in Brooklyn, that somebody had gone into the 7-8 precinct and responded, and they said that they had a device that was going to go off in the subway system that morning. So Paul and Richie responded, and they found the device, and the guy was reaching for the toggle switch when he got shot by emergency service, and he was sent to the hospital. By that time, I drove in. It was about 5 a.m. in the morning, and I got there, and the device was there. So Kevin, Paul, Richie, myself, and of course Jeff, who had the dog, we decided to try to get the device out of the office of where it was. It was another building behind it, and it was a courtyard. So we pulled it out, and then I had Kevin. Meanwhile, all the big bosses were showing up for this job because it was a big job, and everybody thought it was very important. And Mike White says to me, "You run the job, and I'll keep all bosses away from you until you tell me when it's good." So, we were all trained, and I have no problem. Everybody I respected, everybody knew their job. And Richie and Paul had pulled it out. They looked at it. They said, it looks like a real device. So I said, all right, I don't want you guys to do anything more than just come out. Let's pull it out by rope. And we got it down the stairs, and it didn't go off yet. And I had Kevin, who was very good with the robot, take it and disassemble it with the robot. And we got it disassembled. And of course, then we had to bring it up to the outdoor range to check it again. But in the interim, the FBI was going to take over the job after we got done, because they thought it was a terrorist-related job. But Paul, Richie, Jeff, Kevin, everybody did a remarkable job. And I think we all felt that we did the right thing that day.
I would say so. Quick question from Alicia B in the chat. She says, Bomb Squad didn't have pagers back in the day, 1997?
I had a pager. That's all I had. That's kind of antiquated now when you think about it. If I got a call, I would have to go to a payphone in the city at the time, But I was home, like I said, sleeping when they called me. They said to me, "You're covering, and we need you to come in because this is what's happening." And I said, "Okay, I'll be right in." I got dressed and got in the car and drove into Brooklyn. But initially, I've had a job where one of the former bump techs, Glenn Welsh, God rest his soul, had a bad heart and had a family history of bad heart. And he couldn't go down to the training because we used to have to go every 2 years for a refresher. And the FBI would let him come in. And he came into the office. He had retired, and he was waiting to get his pension and everything else. And came in with his, I was off Fridays and Saturdays back then as a supervisor. And I go Friday, I'm home, and my pager goes off based on what you were just saying about pages. And my pager goes off, and I'm going, what are they calling me for? So I answered, and Jerry Hogue was working on Friday, the cover, and he called me and he says to me, Glenn died of a massive heart attack this morning. So that was the only time I remember having the pager that when I got it, it was something I had to respond to.
Oh God, I'm so sorry. That's terrible. It's terrible. So your last year, 1998, 1999, there are the jobs, as we approach the hour mark, and it's been a great conversation with you before I get to the concluding segment, there are the jobs that don't make headlines. So from that period before you left, 98, 99, after the UN, after Brooklyn, after TWA and the Zodiac Killer, is there anything that from that period, your last year, that was a really notable job for you personally?
I can't remember anything in particular. No, I think everything was quiet, much more quiet than it was the years before. So I think that I was very fortunate that when I left in '99, it was a good time to go, and nothing seemed to, happen. Of course, 2 years later, as we know, 9/11 took place. But back then in '99, I don't think I was aware of anything that was going to be happening.
So at that point, and like I said, like we can hit on this and get to the concluding segment. I mean, you got 27 years in, you got a full plate. Like I said, TPF, ESU. Now you're in the middle of your second stint in the bomb squad. Was it saying to yourself, okay, it's a young man's job, I've pretty much done what I wanted to do, that made you retire? Or were there other factors in play that made you say in 1999, yeah, it's time to go, I've had my fun?
Well, it has to do with more so with the traveling. I live way out on the island, so I had to either drive in to Manhattan or I could take the Long Island Railroad. And the railroad had just given every cop off duty the right to take the railroad because of Ferguson shooting up the railroad. And they felt that if more off-duty cops were on the railroad, they would have a little more protection. So even taking the train in, having catching the 5:28 in the morning and getting home at, I would catch the 3:14 if nothing happened in the afternoon. I still wasn't home until 5 o'clock. So it was almost, it's a long day. And I remember when I first started the bomb squad, there was a much senior detective than me. His name was Kelly. And he made a very good statement, and I always remembered it, and I always should tell all the younger officers about that. He said to me, you'll know when it's time to retire. It's not the 20 years, it's not going to be 25 years or 35 years. You know for yourself when it's time to retire. And it hit me on 99, after 27 years, after driving in or taking a train, that I was tired of this commute and everything. And I said, you know what? I think it's time to go. And that was it. Now, I also got shot superficially at the range 2 months before I retired. That was something that it was kind of ironic. I was up there trying to teach two of the detectives how to open a car door with the robot behind these mounds of dirt that we used to use for the firework burns. And the shooting goes on up there 7 days a week or 5 days a week at the range for the regular cycles. And apparently sometimes the bullet goes stray and it goes past the mound and it comes into the back where we were. And sure enough, I get hit with the bullet and I don't feel good. I'm fine. And I'm thinking, well, that's fine. And then the detective says to me, boss, you got a hole in your jacket. So I had a 3/4 Land's End jacket because it was a chilly day. It was April. And I said, really? He said, yeah, take a look. So I looked at, and it was right by the pocket. And I looked down and there was a hole. And I put my hand in my pocket, which is a normal reaction. And there was the bullet. It didn't penetrate me. Well, of course, it made big news with the police department. I had to go and tell the firearms range officer who was in charge that I had gotten hit by this bullet, and we had to make a report and everything else. And I guess that was something that must have stayed with me. And I said, you know what, maybe it's time to go. All these years in TPF, with all the things that I was doing in all those high crime precincts in Manhattan, East New York, Bushwick, and all those sections, in emergency service, going in with the shotgun and all the other stuff that we used to do. And then, of course, the bombs, if it didn't go off, we would, you said yourself, we were very lucky. I said, maybe it's time to go. And that might have had a lot to do with my answer by saying, you know what, I think it's time to call it a career.
I love how you just described so casually, and the bullet went through my jacket. Yeah, it's fine. Not many people will say that way, but hey, listen. No, that's that. If that's an indicator, if that was ever an indicator, yeah, that will definitely tell you it's time to go. One of the viewers does have a question. I don't want to ignore it. Stuart Kelsall, who's a big supporter of the show. Thank you, Stu. He says, has there ever been a job that really changed your perception on the job?
I think I told you that when we had that interview, when you talked to me in March There was a police officer who had worked in the 90 precinct in Williamsburg for almost 17 years, and he was the senior man in the precinct after so many years of not leaving, making boss or whatever. And he just got tired of being that senior man, so he put an application in to go to emergency service. His name was Joe Moran, and they put him up in truck 2, which is the Harlem truck. And, you know, he felt like a fish out of water all those times he was up there. He didn't know what to do. He didn't know anybody. He didn't know how to get around. And I had a Sunday that I was in truck 1, and my partner was off that night. And they were short one man up in truck 2. And they asked me, do you mind going up there and working with Joe tonight? I said, no, I'll work with him. And I worked with him. We had a nice tour, and we talked a lot, and, you know, and I tried to discourage him, or encourage him, I should say, to say, look, Joe, you know, it'll get better. Emergency service is one of the best units in the police department. And I said, you'll enjoy it once you get comfortable. And he said, you know, maybe I will. And I said, good. And I dropped him off at truck 2, and I went down to truck 1. And the next day I come in for 4 to 12, and they say to me, did you hear about Joe? And I said, no. I said, I just got in. They said he was killed today. I said, what do you mean he was killed today? He came back from court. Everybody was on this big job where this guy had a gun, and he was coming out with a rifle in the backyard, and they had him surrounded, and they were trying to talk him out of it. And apparently he kept bringing the rifle up, and then he would just lower it and go in and come back out. And this last time he did it, he raised the rifle and fired it. Now, Joe had gotten up there, and he had put a big heavy-duty vest on, and he was by the tree. And unfortunately, the bullet ricocheted off the tree and hit him in the location where the vest didn't cover him, and killed him instantly. He was cut. He was in the carotid artery. It was that was the end of it. So when I heard that, I said, you know what? We're all here, and I think that at times we don't understand that you never know what's going to happen. We may never go home tonight or today. And I said that this is something we all have to live with, I think. But under the circumstances, I think we all felt that we all took this job for a reason, and it was because we enjoy being there and helping people. So I don't think it really would have made a difference, but I think it just opened my eyes that, yeah, this job, you may not go home tonight.
Was it him?
Was that?
Was it this man that was killed?
Joe Moran?
Joe McCormack, it says here.
His name was Joe Moran from the 90. That's all I know.
Okay.
But yeah, it was sad. You know, I mean, after working with him the night before, but he never got a chance to really enjoy emergency, and that's something that I think everybody. I think, like I said, for all the career that I had, I think emergency was probably the best unit around.
I don't blame you for saying that. Alicia B says Sergeant Hayes always been this chill. Yeah. Well, I guess those times, you know, it builds composure. It builds a degree of zen to approach a job. But this has been a lot of fun. So we have a segment that we end with that is called Rapid Fire. 5 hit and run questions from me, 5 hit and run answers from you. You can say pass if you want. Are you ready?
Okay. Go ahead.
All right. So here we go. First, if not for the NYPD, what other career could you have seen yourself pursuing and enjoying?
I probably would have got into the medical profession. I thought that maybe becoming a physician assistant would have been my appropriate profession besides.
Yeah, not a bad thing to get into. Second, best advice anyone ever gave you?
Well, like I said, the best advice everybody gave me was you have to do what you got to do, but just remember that you have to live with your whatever decision you make, that's what you have to decide with.
Third, thing you miss most about the job, besides the people, of course.
Well, I guess it was the excitement. Every day was different. You know, whereas it wasn't a routine that you could just say, I'm going in to do this every day, and it would be the same day after day. Every day was different, and I think that makes it so much more interesting.
Fourth, favorite bar or restaurant in New York City?
Well, since we were in Manhattan most of the time, I don't really say for sure, but I think that the place that caught my eye was on a Sunday morning, if we could, we would go to Teresa's, which was a Polish restaurant, and have a Polish breakfast. That was something that you would not see in a lot of parts of the city, but down in 3rd Street on 2nd Avenue, that's where it was. It was a great place to go.
Fifth and finally, and I'm going to flip this question around a little bit. Usually I say if you catch a cop just graduating, what advice would you give him? But let's change the question to this. Let's say you just get a new bomb tech who just came back from Huntsville. He or she's got all this knowledge in their head. They're ready to go. They're ready to work their first package. They feel like they're Superman or Superwoman. If you could pull them to the side, given your experiences in the bomb squad, what would you tell a brand spanking new bomb tech?
Well, first of all, be careful and don't become a risk taker. Follow protocols and procedure. And I think that was the first thing that we all had to understand, that you could not just be a cowboy out there and decide to do anything you wanted to do. We all knew that taking risks was one thing, but if you took them under the protocol of what you were supposed to do, I think you would realize that it was a better choice.
Sergeant, this has been a lot of fun. Don't sign off yet. We'll say goodbye off the air. Stick around. Before we go, I'm going to say goodbye to the audience in a moment. Is there any shout outs to anyone or anything? Anybody you want to say hello to?
Well, I mean, like I said, some of the people I worked with, I'd like to say goodbye and hello to everybody, Kevin Barry, Charlie Epps, all those people that I had the pleasure of working with. And I say that sincerely, that we all were in the right place at the right time, and I think we all enjoyed each other.
As always, shout out to the audience. Steve Zaslafty, thank you for tuning in. Joe Maliga, Alicia B, Stu Kelsaw, John Latanzio, retired E-Man, Dawn Marie, she's here. Billy Ryan from Arson Explosion, he's watching. He sends his regards. Let's see here, make sure I don't miss anybody else. Ruth Ann Griffin, I think you're here as well. And if I go up here, yeah, you are. So thank you, everybody, for tuning in. Coming up next on the Mike to New Haven podcast, he started out in transit like you did, Sarge, and then he went to the NYPD in 1986, where he spent time in Brooklyn and in Queens. Had a lot of interesting cases that he worked, and he was a bodyguard on the side, too. He provided security for Ralph Lauren and the Princess of Saudi Arabia, amongst others. His name is Richard Sharp, and he'll be here on the next episode of the Mike to New Haven podcast. In the meantime, like I said, Sarge, stick around. Don't say goodbye yet. We'll say goodbye off the air. On behalf of retired NYPD Bomb Squad Sergeant Eddie Hayes, this has been Volume 22 of Tales from the Boom Room, profiles of the NYPD's Arson, Explosion, and Bomb Squad. We will see you next time. Take care, everybody. Have a great rest of your weekend, and please enjoy this beautiful weather. Goodbye.